Unless, of course, I can find the antidote. I owe it to my friend to try because I got her into this. So you see, I'm not going to let you stop me now! Hello and welcome back to the Doctor Who Marathon. I'm your host McEdam, and today we're going to be talking about The Caves of Androzani, written by none other than Robert Holmes, making his debut in the John Nathan Turner era, and is directed by first-time director Graham Harper. Now, Graham Harper, this was his first Doctor Who story, and I believe it was also his first story he directed. And he was so immensely popular. He did such a fantastic job that he's one of the only directors to appear in both Classic Who and New Who. And he has a bit of a legacy as being the best Doctor Who director. And after watching this story, it's hard to think otherwise. This is a 4-part adventure and is the final adventure to feature Peter Davison as the 5th Doctor, who left because he wasn't happy with the scripts that he was given. He got around this time, and he felt like the production was not to his standards. One thing he criticised the show for is the style of directing. Usually during this time, the director of the serial would sit in a booth outside of the regular filming, giving orders through a microphone to tell everybody what to do and where they are. But Graham Harper actually went onto the sets and had a much more hands-on approach. And Peter Davison really liked this idea that he said that he has been quoted multiple times that if other stories were directed in the style of Graham Harper's more hands-on approach, he would have stayed on for at least 2 more years. So that's a real big shame. Graham Harper also as well not only made a fantastic piece with, which also just looks stunning, he also, for a very few occasions in classic Doctor Who, actually got the show in budget. You don't know how often that happens. It rarely happens, if at all. So Graham Harper doing this story basically set him up as being not only a great director in front of the screen, getting what we want from a story, but also from behind the scenes for getting the actors and producers and everybody on board very happy with the story. So yeah, that's really cool. Robert Holmes is also cited as being one of the best Doctor Who writers, writing for some classic stories like Spearheads from Space. And this would be his first, and I believe his only, regeneration story. And it's also the first story in the 80s era, as he didn't write for any stories in the John Nathan Turner era up until this point. He would go on to have a good track record with John Nathan Turner and reprise his return more writing duties until his sad passing in, I believe it was 1986. So anyway, onto the story on hand. The Doctor and Peri land on Androzani Minor, one of the 2 planets of Androzani, the other being Androzani Major, which is a much more city-based planet. But they land on Minor, which is almost like a wasteland. And what's really funny, I find, in this story is the Doctor soon discovers the so-called caves of Androzani. But he quickly points out that they're not caves, they're air holes. There's a little bit in the story in which he explains the difference. So, blowholes, I believe he actually said. But I guess blowholes of Androzani didn't have a nice ring to it. So, him and Peri start off this story really the scenery is just set up perfectly as the TARDIS materializes, I should say, in the distance, and you see our characters appear out really small on this landscape, basically setting up the idea that they are insignificant compared to the settings, their surroundings. Because this is one of the few stories in which not only does Doctor and Perry don't have any real contribution to its plot, but they seem to have actively made the situation worse. If the Doctor and Perry didn't turn up, none of these terrible situations which are about to proceed take place. And so this idea of a long shot of the Doctor and Perry, and it stays there for a while until the Doctor notices something. Perry notices something, glass in the sand, which emphasises that there was a spacecraft here recently. So yeah, this long shot that stays on for long is just superb. And again, just Graham Harper just already nailing it in the park at just a very few seconds. But anyway, the Doctor and Perry go into the caves, and first they meet no one, and Perry accidentally falls into some substance, and her leg gets caught up into it, and the Doctor puts his hand into it and doesn't think it's poisonous or anything, and thinks that Perry should be fine. So they wander on more, and they bump into a group of military workers trying their best to sabotage the plans of Saljar Jax. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. He's got a very hard name to pronounce. I'm just going to call him Jax because why not? This really strange gimp guy who works with androids and is halting the flow of a particular mineral which the people of Androzani Major desperately need. And the Doctor and Perry get caught up in this, and they're automatically believed to be gun runners, as we see earlier in the story that there are gun runners in these caves trying to get guns to Jax, but they were soon halted and their weapons were taken away from them. And so these characters go to Jax trying to get this mineral. And the Doctor kind of learns a bit about this war to begin with, in which there was originally a partnership between two groups of people, Morgus and Jax. However, Morgus betrayed Jax when he wanted basically all the money to himself. And so Jax survived his torment and was horribly disfigured, and he wears this gimp suit, and he basically lives in these caves with a bunch of androids, and he stops the flow of this particular mineral for the sole purpose of asking the president to bring Morgus to Androzani Minor so that he could kill him. He basically he's desperate for revenge, and so this kind of civil war for this mineral breaks out. And what makes this story really interesting is that besides the Doctor and Perry, no one is really innocent. We have the captain of this military group, who kind of has the attitude of getting the job done, and so he believes that the Doctor is a gun runner and doesn't really trust him, and wants to interrogate him further, only to get contacted by Morgus, who takes one look at the Doctor and Perry and is like, they're clearly criminals. I feel contaminated just by looking at them. And so the Doctor and Perry are sent to prison to wait their execution. And it's here that the Doctor notices that Perry's legs are getting itchy, and they're getting almost like scarring on him, and so does the Doctor's hand, which touched that stuff at the start of the story. Later on, they are sentenced to death in these red robes and are gunned down by a really threatening cliffhanger, which used realistic guns, no lasers, realistic guns showing them shooting the Doctor and Perry dead. And that's our cliffhanger for part 1. It is a fantastic cliffhanger. The story then revolves as the Doctor and Perry turned out to be androids in that scene. During their imprisonment, they were saved by Jax. However, he is a very strange character. Like everybody else, he's a very unjustified character in terms of his moral compass. As this civil war is basically for him to kill one guy to get his revenge on his scarring, and that's the only reason why he stops this flow of minerals. But he takes a kind of liking to the Doctor, and especially Perry, who he kind of has a fancy to. And we get some scenes where he's close up to Perry and he's kind of touching her shoulders and kind of smothering her, and she's really uncomfortable. And what's really great is that Jax, despite being a non-moral character, he's very relatable. You can easily see his point of view. This is a person which has been horribly disfigured. He is scared to go out in the outside world in fear of rejection, and he is fueled with utter hatred for this guy because of his disfigurement, because he's been basically wrongly wronged upon. And when he takes a liking to Perry, he likes her, but not for the reasons of love or appreciation for Perry. It is because of her beauty. And what makes this story really good is that I think a lot of people can kind of relate, but it's also a moral dilemma which I think a lot of people in the real world need to, especially men, if we're going to be honest, have to suffer, which is he likes Perry not for her and not for her personality or anything, but it makes him forget his own existence. It makes him forget his own disfigurement, and that's why he wants to keep Perry there against her will. The Doctor he's not too keen on compared to Perry, and would happily kill him if the Doctor irritated him too much, which puts a real strain on our characters. It's also here where we learn what the mineral actually does, as it stops the aging process and allows people to basically live forever if they keep this mineral, which is a very unjustified reason to have this civil war, to have so many people die just so people can just look a lot younger than they actually are. Now let's talk about Morgan. A lot of his scenes take place outside from the main setting on Androzani Major, and where he is clearly living in luxury, and he gets to meet with the president of his of Major, and he basically has a lot of influence and stuff. But my God, that actor really knows how to play a really good bad guy. John Nortington plays Morgan, and he plays it extremely serious. And with any other actor, I think this could have been a flop performance, because there's a lot of great cheesy moments to this character, but they cast one of the best actors to get this performance out. He's a very serious to the point of hilarious, to where he's so convicted into his mind process and his way of living, and we see it as he is desperate for this mineral to keep his business going. Although with this kind of civil war, he's kind of actually benefited from it, as he can higher the price of the mineral, not really caring about his workers, the people who work underneath him. We also get some very strange moments, almost in Shakespeare inspired, where we have some internal monologues where he turns to the camera and tells the audience what he's thinking. Again, this is what I'm on about. If this was played by any other actor and had any other director, this bit of the story could have easily flopped and could have had our viewer and audience being like, hold on, I don't understand. He's just telling nobody his plans. But Graham Harper and John Nortington balance each other out so well that there is no question on what's happening, and it lets us have a great sense of tension as we have him scheming and we have him kind of working out what's going on and pretending to be joyful with everyone else. However, when he turns to the camera, he gets really angry and he gets to show his true emotions, and that's where we really blur the lines between reality and fiction in this story. A great moment is when it turns out that he discovers that the Doctor and Perry were androids, and that well, he doesn't discover them, but he later discovers that the Doctor still lives, and he believes that the captain wouldn't have taken any other orders unless it was from him or the president, and so he basically he basically comes to the conclusion that the president has discovered his plot, basically, and that he's discovered, so that he basically plots to kill the president. And the scene in which it's just a really great, well-paced performance as we turn to him looking at the captain and talking to him and being reasonable. But then he turns to the camera and is just very pissed and very annoyed, and you can see his thought process as he's working out what's going on. So, yeah, just absolutely fantastic. It's also here where the Doctor and Perry befriend Salatine, a member of the military crew that they have previously met. However, the version they'd met before was an android created by Jax to get intel on their movements. So there's a great power that Jax has over his enemies. And whilst they're all in imprisonment, the Doctor explains that Perry's not feeling well, and neither's the Doctor, and they're getting this scarring and stuff, and their bodies starting to tense up. And Salatine basically laughs to himself as he realises, with the company of the intellectual Doctor and the beautiful Perry, he will become obsolete, and Jax might be tempted to kill him. However, when he learns that the Doctor and Perry were dipped into this particular poison, which turns out to be extremely deadly, and nobody has really survived it for millennia, as the antidote, which comes from a queen bat milk, which has gone underneath the caves of Androzani, and where no oxygen is, and so whoever goes there basically dies. So there's basically no hope apart from getting this milk, and the Doctor and Perry are really struggling as their bodies are deteriorating, and this power struggle is basically stopping them from doing their mission, stopping them from getting a cure and leaving. And so with the Doctor and Perry make a plan to escape, as the robots are set up to look for human life, but the Doctor isn't human. In a very cool scene, we see the Doctor from the android's point of view, and we see the Doctor's two hearts in his chest as it scans him, determining if he's a human or not. And the Doctor basically tricks the robot to stop seeing human life, and so they can escape. However, Sabatine tricks the Doctor as he attacks him, knocking him out, and taking Perry back to the military group, and basically explaining what's going on. And so the Doctor's basically knocked out, completely weakened, and he is then recaptured by Jax, who has met up with the gun runners, and the gun runners take a little bit of the mineral, not as much as Jax promised, because they failed to retrieve the guns, but they decide to take the Doctor with him because they believe he's a valuable asset, a valuable prisoner for their main boss, who we don't know who it is at the time. And so the Doctor gets taken to his ship, and the Doctor has this moment where he's a prisoner of the gunrunners, and it's later revealed that the gunrunners are working for Morgan, who is basically playing both sides of the Civil War, so he can benefit from it as much as possible. He doesn't really care about Jax's revenge or not. He's just in it for profit, and he really couldn't care less who dies or not, as long as he gets what he wants. And either way, he's benefiting from this one way or another. And so the Doctor slowly escaping by breaking his chains. In a really tense moment, the Doctor finds a rod that burns, and because he can't see, because his hands are tied from his back, he has to maneuver his arm so that it breaks the chain and not burn him. And then we get one of the most iconic scenes, one of the greatest cliffhangers of the series, as the Doctor takes control of the ship and tries to land it on Androzani Minor. And whilst the gunrunners discover this, and they try and break down the door, but the Doctor, he states he's out of practice, he doesn't know how to fly the ship, so he's just going to crash land on Minor because he's in desperate times, as Perry's dying and he needs this antidote. And he screams to his captives, "Nothing can stop me now. You won't be able to stop me now," which is one of the most heroic moments of the Doctor, as he will risk everything, even his own life, to try and get to Perry, because he owes it to her, because he put her in this situation. Now, like I've stated in previous stories, the Fifth Doctor is one of the few Doctors to actually have a overarching story arc, a character arc going through his story, as he's a good man trying to be a great man, trying to save as many people as he can, but constantly failing. He failed to save Adric, he failed to save Chameleon. Tegan left him because of all the death and destruction and how many innocent lives died during his so-called adventures. And in this story, we have the Doctor and Perry basically put in a no-win scenario, where the Civil War that isn't over anything good or just is halting him from getting Perry a cure. And basically, if it wasn't for the fact that the Doctor took Perry to this planet, she wouldn't be in this situation where she is, to the brim of death. And Peter Davison gives off easily his best performance here, as these themes, this dilemma of his character is basically put up to the forefront, and really shows why Peter Davison is one of the best Doctors. And yeah, so as we're getting on to part 4, let's talk about Nicola Bryant as Perry Brown, who was introduced in the previous story, Planet of Fire. I stated in that story that despite her having a really nice character, a personality to work off, she doesn't get a lot to do in terms of plot. And in my opinion, kind of the same thing happens here, as she's a very likable character. You root for her, you want her to survive, you want her to escape, and Nicola Bryant does a fantastic job of portraying this very young, very optimistic young lady who just wants to sightsee and have some fun, harmless adventures, getting caught up in this mess. However, apart from her being an anchor to the Doctor's emotions, and her basically being basically absolutely tortured throughout this adventure, she doesn't get a lot to do. But I think in this story they kind of justify it because of how bleak and dark the situation is, and how the innocence of this Doctor allows, and this particular story allows for her dilemma to really affect the Doctor's character. So I think in this particular very narrow viewpoint, I think her part in this plot is very well justified, in my opinion. So in part 4, the Doctor, probably one of the greatest action scenes in the show's history, in my opinion. He's running around on the landscape of Androzani Minor as the gunrunners try following him, shooting at him with bullets as the Doctor's chasing around, and these bursts of steam from the planet, which also explodes sometimes, gets in the way of him. And there's a bit which the Doctor collapses onto the floor, and he talks to himself, and he's like, "I'm sorry, Perry. I just wasn't that good enough. I wasn't that quick." And you see the Doctor basically giving up until a nearby explosion basically fills him with adrenaline as he gets up on his feet. Basically a dying man doing everything he can just so he can get to Perry. And you've got these gun runners, these really ruthless gun runners, and the fact and the directing in it, the very close-ups of the sand when the shots are getting fired, and the fact that they use like machine guns and not lasers, really gives a grounded sense of the story, and that the Doctor could die at any moment. In fact, the Doctor doesn't seem sure that he could regenerate. He thinks that this poison might be able to kill him. And so when he's trying to get back into the caves, I know they're air holes, blowholes, but let's just call them caves for the sake of convenience. The Civil War basically gets intensified as 17's android basically works out that he's returned with Perry back onto the military base, and so this whole dilemma ensues, and 17 comes up with this plan because he stole one of the belts which allows Jax to walk around freely with their androids, and he duplicates it for the rest of the military group to allow Jax's robots to let them through so that they can get to Jax. But Jax basically already works this out, and so he retunes the androids so that the belts will not work. And so when they go in and discover Jax's base, the androids just slaughter them, and everything just engulfs as the entire base starts exploding around them. And Jax basically saves Perry and takes her to his base, and he's mortified to find that she is basically dying, and there is literally no hope as nobody can go down the caves as there's a lack of oxygen, and it's too far down, and he's only got one oxygen tank, and it would not be enough to allow somebody to get the milk. However, the Doctor is a Time Lord, which means that he can store air in his lungs for much longer than any normal human being. I believe he says an hour, but I could be mistaken. The Doctor goes on a really quick quest to go down to the bottom of the caves to get the bat's milk, so that he can get to save Perry and himself. However, there seems to be only a very small amount which can only be used for one person. And the Doctor does his absolute best. A dying man, a man who gets caught up in a war where nobody is justified, no one is innocent, takes this material, goes up to the base where Jax and one of the gun runners have a shootout and basically murder one another as the 17 android kills the gun runner. And the Doctor basically sees all this, sees their bodies dead, and just doesn't care. He just runs up, picks up Perry by her almost lifeless body and runs out onto the landscape of Androzani Minor and heads to the TARDIS. And it's also important to note that Morgan, who's now taken a spaceship to Minor after he's killed the president in secrecy, and that he's planning to go to this planet to sort out something with Jax, ending this once and for all. And he goes onto this planet. However, he soon discovers that his secretary has basically leaked all of his information, and he's now technically on the run. And so Morgan goes to Jax and tries to talks to him and is like, "You disgust me," and blah 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 blah. And Morgan, before his death, takes off his mask, showing his disfigurement, and chokes Morgan to death. Basically, everybody seems to die. In fact, if you count the Fifth Doctor's part in it as death, every male character dies in this story. So basically, and there's only really two female characters, Perry and the secretary, who's really just a minor character. So I don't really count her. So really, the Perry's the only person who survives the story. And the Doctor does desperately to try and get their bodies into the TARDIS. And he gets into the TARDIS. He gives Perry the last of the milk, sacrificing himself to save Perry, finishing his character arc, as he has desperately tried to save people in which he just physically couldn't. And in this situation, he basically risked everything, including his own life, just to save one person, just to do everything he can to give this one girl, this one innocent girl, and if you go by the TV stories, he's only just met her, this small innocent girl who's done nothing wrong, he saves her life because he knows it's the right thing to do. And so the Doctor collapses onto the floor and states that basically he might not regenerate. He doesn't know. It feels different this time. The Doctor sees visions of his past companions. All of the Fifth Doctor companions return, including Matthew Waterhouse as Adric, which is really cool that they brought him back. And you see their faces swirling around, pleading the Doctor not to die. This emphasises that the Doctor has basically made a bunch of friends. He's basically remembering the good times. And he's basically, despite them telling him not to die because they like him so much, I think this scene sets up that he's basically ready to die. But not quite, as another face appears, as the Master taunts the Doctor to die. To die, Doctor, you must die. Which taunts the Doctor, reminds the Doctor that there are still evil in the universe, which triggers his regeneration as a burst of energy smothers the screen and jumps out from the Fifth Doctor's spot is Colin Baker as the sixth incarnation of our favourite Time Lord. That is how you do a regeneration story. This is probably the first story where it's really built up upon on the regeneration. Though Logopolis could also have that distinction of being one of the first stories where regeneration is a factor. But here it really emphasises the dilemma that the Doctor's facing, in which whether to live or die is put at the forefront of the story. And so you could also count this as the first story to really tackle regeneration. And so this is also the first time in which would actually become a mainstay in the series, in which the new Doctor gets a few lines in before the credits roll, as Perry doesn't understand, and she's like, "Doctor, you expecting somewhere else?" And Perry stutters with, because she's trying to get her words out. She's like, I, and the Doctor's like, "3 eyes in one breath makes you sound like a egotistical young lady." And Perry just doesn't understand. She asks him what's going on. And the Doctor just looks at the camera and goes, "Change, my dear, and not a moment too soon." And that's the end of the Caves of Androzani. Overall, it is one of the best Doctor Who stories. In fact, it has been number one in the Doctor Who polls for best story in the Doctor Who magazine for so many years. And do you know how I state that Genesis of the Daleks and Resurrection of the Daleks are the Empire Strikes Back of Doctor Who according to the fan base? Well, the Caves of Androzani has the distinction of being the Citizen Kane of Doctor Who, the almost flawless production which shows that Robert Holmes is one of the best writers of the series. That Graham Harper, this was Graham Harper's first Doctor Who story. He made one of the best, if not the best Doctor Who story. He got it in budget, and he did it whilst keeping everybody on the set happy and unstressed. This is like gold for any television. Caves of Androzani, go watch it. There's nothing more I can say. You just go watch it. It's usually in the top number one story in a lot of Doctor Who fans' favourite stories overall. In fact, I know that Mr. TARDIS Reviews, a Doctor Who YouTuber who's very popular, is quite cited it as his favourite Doctor Who story of all time. So the story is very important in terms of just the quality of Doctor Who stories. But now we have to say goodbye to the Fifth Doctor era and say hello to a brand new Doctor. So join me next time where the Doctor suffers from post-traumatic regeneration disorder as the poison messed up his regeneration. And the Doctor gets caught up with a conspiracy revolving around two siblings. So join me next time for the twin dilemma. And we say hello to the Sixth Doctor. See you next time on the Doctor Who Marathon. Ta-ra.